morning. Welcome to Sunday morning worship with the gathered community of the First Parish in Lincoln. My name is Jenny Rankin, and I'm the interim minister. Old friends, new friends, people here for the first time ever, we're so glad you've chosen to join us today. We look forward to one day welcoming you to our historic sanctuary, our beautiful sanctuary that you just saw in the heart of Lincoln, next to a great green field. But for right now, we worship right here, Sunday after Sunday at 10 a.m. We ask that you remain muted so that the background noise in your home stays with you. And we're going to start with a few announcements, and then we'll wave to each other and deepen into worship. So, Margaret.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to invite the children to think about their joys and concerns this morning. We'll be lighting some candles a little bit later on. So if you have anything that you haven't shared or that you would like to share, you can type it right into the chat.
Thank you. And Deanna, our deacon.
Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the deacons, I wanted to send out a reminder that we will be doing this every week, all summer long. The deacons will be hosting services. There should be some different forms of services. We'll also have help from Margaret and Sarah. And next week, we'll have Rosemary. So please join us. Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you. Mary Helen.
Hello, I'm speaking on behalf of the Anti-Racism Task Force, and I want to remind you that on Thursday of this week, we'll be showing the film Suppressed, The Right to Vote. It's a 40-minute documentary about the suppression of voters, particularly in minority communities in Georgia, in the 2018 midterm election. We've all seen the disturbing problems this past week in Georgia. The film is a timely demonstration of the urgent need to protect the rights of all voters in Georgia or elsewhere. You can join us on Zoom at 7 o'clock on Thursday the 18th. You can see the link in the parish news brief and on the website. And the discussion afterwards will be facilitated by Jean Milburn. She's a resident of Wayland and a member of their UU church. And she and other parishioners have been leading the UU Get Out the Vote effort for Wayland, one that we are participating in. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Helen. And Ken Hurd.
Good morning, everybody. Speaking also on behalf of the Anti-Racist Task Force, we are proposing to place a temporary Black Lives Matter banner on the church, and we will seek parish committee approval to do so at their meeting next Wednesday. Many of you may recall that Mariama White Hammond preached from the First Parish pulpit last year, and some of you may have heard her speak at last Sunday's memorial service held for George Floyd here in Boston. She delivered a powerful and poignant message when she said, "Far too long, white American churches have been silent in the face of suffering by God's children of African descent." By seizing this moment to display a temporary banner, we hope to help raise awareness and expand the conversation in our community. We believe that by doing the hard work of seeking a deeper understanding of racism and its effect on our shared humanity, we can further fulfill our call to ministry by truly working to affirm each person's dignity. And by the way, we are pleased to share that we have the endorsement and full support of the deacons, the outreach committee, the Youth Programs Committee, and the Community Engagement and Service Task Force. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. And now let us take a minute to greet one another virtually. Hi, everybody. Scroll around, see who's here. Good morning. It's good to see so many of you outside, inside. Welcome to worship. Now let us deepen into our worship with an opening prayer.
Dear God, Spirit of love and hope, we ask you be with us this morning as we move into this summer full of unknowing and unrest. We pray you'll help us to find ways to carry your love around with us in our pockets. We ask that you keep us on the right path, and when we feel full of despair, help us remember the words from the St. Francis prayer, where there is despair, hope. And God, we rejoice in a prayer of thanks for Jenny. Her wonderful ministry has lifted up our spirits again and again and kept our faith strong and alive. We have never felt alone. We are so very grateful. Amen.
And let's now join in song. I love singing these hymns and listening to Ian and Margaret play and sing. Our hymn this morning is Old Hundredth. The words will be on your screen.
Please join me in saying the words to our covenant. In the love of truth and in the spirit of Jesus, we unite for the worship of God and the service of all.
Good morning again, everyone. So if you're just joining us, any kiddos just joining us, if you can think of something that you're joyful about or concerned about, you can type it into the chat, or something that you're thinking about this summer that you're joyful about or concerned about. And it's with that in mind that I will light our candle in the spirit of summer, things to look forward to and things we're concerned about. I'm just checking the chat. Great. All right, so Joey says that he is very grateful to be living in Truro this summer, but he's also worried that he won't be able to spend time with his cousins this year because of COVID. Charlie is happily on an adventure in Concord with his dad, a little one-to-one time, and that's very exciting. They expect to see some friends there. Bia is grateful for so much family time, for not rushing anywhere, for planting a bigger garden. She's concerned about danger and safety and fairness. Lila enjoys sleeping in after watching a late night movie with her mom. Grateful for that flexibility. And she's concerned about next school year. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but they're planning it. Serena is excited for baby chicks and fresh peas, going to the beach and seeing Grandma and Grandpa at the campgrounds this summer. And she's worried about COVID and about Black people not being treated fairly. In these words of our children, in their joys and their concerns, you can read a little deeper. We give joys for planned and executed adventures. We give joys for things we can touch, like baby chicks and peas, for time with family, so special and sacred. We share our concern for our larger family, our world family, our family of Black and brown skin. We share concerns about what our futures might hold in the coming school year. And for families and friends that we're not able to see because of illness, because of COVID. Thank you for sharing those with us this morning.
So this morning we have to say goodbye to someone. We said goodbye to Gert last Sunday, and today we're saying goodbye to Meredith, our student minister. So I'll turn it over first to Jeannie Welsh.
Meredith, I had the privilege of chairing your student minister committee this year, and indeed it has been a privilege. Along with Mimsy Beckwith, Paula Waterman, and Gary Taylor, your student minister support committee has met with you throughout this church year to check in, provide feedback, and most importantly, to receive some feedback from you. The world has changed a great deal since that sunny day in the spring of 2019 when you came for your interview and we toured the church. We know that it turned out it wasn't exactly the way you had planned it to be. Nevertheless, you accomplished a great deal, Meredith. We enjoyed watching you become more comfortable in the pulpit. We watched you take an active role in our education and our understanding of LGBTQ and racial issues. And you held us in your Wednesday evening prayers during some very dark times. Meredith, we hope that you learned some of what you came here to learn. We certainly learned from you. Although we understand that as you leave us, you need to create some distance for a while. Please know, however, that you will always have a ministerial home at First Parish in Lincoln. Nothing would please us more than seeing you in our pews and having you in our pulpit again. May God bless you and keep you.
And now Nick Cavino has something for Meredith.
So good morning, everybody. I'm apologetic. I'm up in the mountains on a downhill mountain bike track with Peter and an alarming number of people whose first name is Dude. I don't know how we got here with so many dudes, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to make this presentation. You will be probably one of the very few people who have managed to do their internship partly online and from home. But as Jeannie said, you've made a remarkable impression on this congregation with your preaching, with your service, with your teaching. And I know because she has said this many times, you've allowed our pastor to have a great deal of freedom and opportunity and time because of the very good work and the trustworthy work that you've done. So there is a gift that we're giving, if Sarah can show that. This is like any other religious garment, something with many meanings attributed to it. Some folks think that it was practical at one point, like a napkin. Other folks think symbolically, like it was a way to remember the bonds that tied Jesus's hands during the last moments of his life. folks also say this is a symbol of your office. This indicates to others that you are a cleric, you are a teacher, a preacher, a healer. We know that until you get called for your ordination, you'll keep it safely. At the moment, I've got it, I think, at my house, thanks to Mimsy. But we'll find a way to get it to you to keep. With our great, great thanks for the blessings that you brought upon us and our expectations that you will continue to bring blessings to the folks that you serve and partner with. So thank you. Congratulations on your recent degree and the completion of this phase of your life. And good luck as you move to Memphis and your next step. Please stay in touch with us.
Just want to say thank you so much for this beautiful stole. Let you know what a blessing it has been to serve this community this year. I've learned so much, and you all have touched my heart, and I'll think of you whenever I wear it. Thank you for believing in me and in my ministry. I'm so grateful.
Meredith, you've been a wise colleague, a trustworthy member of our staff team. You've shared your heart and your soul with us, given us a glimpse of who you are, and we're so grateful. Blessings on the next leg of your ministerial journey. Our reading today is by the 19th century African-American Frederick Douglass. He lived from 1818 to 1895. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its waters. This struggle may be a moral one. It may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress.
We come now to the time in our service that we set aside for silent and spoken prayers. To help us prepare, we will sing a hymn. You're invited to sing along at home if you wish. We will then have a minute of silence, followed by the reading of any prayers that have been sent in.
Please listen with an open heart to the prayers of our community. A prayer of hope for Rose, niece of Jenny, with Down syndrome who will return to her day program in Iowa soon. Prayers of gratitude for my time with you all this year. We hold these prayers, both those spoken aloud and those named only in the silence of our hearts, in the love of this community. Loving God, Spirit of life, be with us this morning and hear our prayers. We give thanks today for another church year together and for this gathered community that has seen us through joys and heartaches. Though this may not have been the year that any of us imagined, we have found ways for our hearts to stay close, even as our building has been closed. We rejoice in the love shared here among us. We gather too in lament and righteous anger at the injustices of our time. We are outraged at the violence being done to Black people all across this nation, and our spirits are in solidarity with them. We have watched in horror as instances of police brutality are exposed over and over again, knowing that this is in fact nothing new. Spirit of life, help us to lean into discomfort so that we may rise to meet the needs of the world as well as of one another. We don't have all the answers, but we know that life cannot continue this way. We pray and work and hope for a new way of being, a new way of living. This year has been difficult beyond what any of us could have imagined. But we hold on to hope, knowing that we are not alone. There are those here who will rejoice with those who rejoice, who will weep with those who weep. There are people here to ask the hard questions with, to laugh with, to sit in silence with. May we hold this hope in our hearts until we meet again. Amen.
At this time, when we know the needs are so great, we appreciate your generosity so much. Today's offering will go to beef up the minister's discretionary fund, which is especially important during these COVID-19 times. You may donate online at fplincoln.org/donate or mail a check to the church at 14 Bedford Road, Lincoln, Mass. Thank you.
Dear friends, most of the time I write early in the morning in my study, but for some reason this week I had to go outside, sit near the patch of ground I call the back garden, look at the raised beds, lettuces coming up, basil all in a row, neat and orderly, the sky that deep blue color of June, seeds of sunflower and cosmos just sprouting. I think of how you've told me in long weeks of quarantine this spring that tending seeds on your kitchen sill or puttering in your vegetable garden, how it gave you comfort. Maybe I need the earth to ground me in these days. Such days they have been. This long, strange spring of pandemic, and then the hope and heartbreak of the last few weeks as we have mourned and raged, protests spreading like wildfire across our nation and around the world, and coming still. I look at this little patch of ground and think of the essay that one of you sent me this week. Thank you. It's called A Little Patch of Something, published in the Paris Review, and written by Imani Perry, who is the Hughes Rogers Professor of African American History at Princeton. When the pandemic hit and people were pushed indoors, it seemed, Perry writes, as though there was a quietly reached consensus that it was time to touch the earth anew. She found herself growing microgreens, keeping them on her nightstand where the light from the window could help them grow. She wasn't new to plants. She loved trees and flowers, but growing food was new for her. It comforts, she writes. It feels as though in this uncertain time, I am connected to the ancestors, the way they'd often grow a little patch of something for sustenance. From the time when the Old South turned into the New South, which I suppose is now old again, most all Black folks spent a lifetime of scraping and scuffling. Land of one's own was hard to come by. White supremacy wielded its power over the land. But even for the sharecropper, a little patch of something, a rectangle of dirt on which to grow greens, tomatoes, cabbage, berries. Even when the dirt was hard and spent, Black hands eked sprouts from it, tended them to fullness, and ate from the bounty. So Imani Perry grew greens for comfort and for connection with her ancestors, and she saw that she was not alone, watching as friends posted photos on social media of seeds and sprouts. I saw on Facebook the garden my brother Tom grew during lockdown in Rome, fashioned out of plastic crates and soil that he lugged home, trying to remember what he'd learned about gardening when he was 12 from my mother, comfort and connection. And when the world shifted again after George Floyd's death, Imani Perry remembered that even when the Klan mobs charged into Black homes and ripped out someone who was loved and strung them up, the turnips kept growing. And when bombs shook Dynamite Hill in Birmingham, she wrote, and the hoses knocked over skinny brown children, the pecans fell from branches. Plums hung heavy, purple, and sweet as hot rage bubbled from the gut. I look at my little patch of something and I think of Imani Perry and her microgreens and her beautiful words and think what a time it's been. Pandemic sweeping the world like a great wind and blowing still, strong, and not nearly done. Quarantine, isolation, adaptation, and just when we thought we might be getting used to that, if one ever can, everything changed again overnight with George Floyd's death. A devastation of grief and anger and outrage and heartbreak rolling over our country. People pouring out onto the streets, tens upon tens of thousands around the world. These last months have been massive, historic, devastating, hopeful. These great cataclysmic events coming at us like great waves crashing over our heads. Sometimes I struggle just to try and take it all in. Cognitively, just to wrap my mind around it, the worldwide scope of the pandemic, the deaths and job losses, the economic devastation we're just beginning to understand, and the racism we're confronting, again, that original sin on which we know our country was founded. I'm struggling to take it all in, cognitively, but also spiritually, emotionally, to stay present with it. Last week, I heard a conversation between Ibram X. Kendi and Brene Brown. Kendi is a leading scholar of racism and the author of many books, including How to Be an Anti-Racist. And Brene Brown is a Texas-born researcher who focuses on vulnerability and shame. Brown said to Kendi that she found his most recent book personal and noted how vulnerable he often was in the writing. He said to her, "I think confession is a part of this anti-racism movement." So I confess to you, I've got a long way to go. I've got a lot to learn. And I know there are articles like the one in the Washington Post, when Black people are in pain, white people form book clubs. I know that, but there's still a lot I've got to learn, a lot of books I need to read. I studied American history in high school and college, but it was a different history than that portrayed by Harvard historian Jill Lepore in her book, These Truths, A History of the United States. It's a big, fat book, and I've just got started with it. But already one sentence has seared itself into my brain. She's talking about how America was founded, the English coming over, the colonists. She writes, England came late to founding colonies, and it came late to trafficking in slaves. But nearly as soon as it entered that trade, it dominated it. Between 1600 and 1800, 1 million Europeans migrated to British America. And in that same period, 2.5 million Africans were carried there by force on ships owned and operated by the British. The first African slave arrived in New England in 1638 on a ship called the Desire, which arrived in Salem from the West Indies. New England colonists had captured Pequot Indians in Connecticut. They took them to the West Indies and traded them for African slaves. John Winthrop, remember him, The City on a Hill, described it in his diary, saying that New England colonists had traded Indians for, quote, some cotton and tobacco and Negroes, close quote. Jill Lepore writes, the English in the colonies understood their rights as free men derived from an ancient constitution. They knew that it guaranteed even kings were subject to, quote, the laws of the land, close quote. These same people sold Indians and bought Africans. By what right did they rule them in their city on a hill? There would never be many Africans in New England, Jill Lepore writes, but nearly half of colonial New Englanders' wealth would come from sugar grown by West Indian slaves. That wealth is what helped to make Boston the Athens of America, as my dad liked to say to me when I was a kid. A place of colleges and art museums, libraries, churches, and schools. A place where culture flourished and free thinking was encouraged. That wealth poured into the coffers of churches like the one where I was raised in Boston, laid the foundation for colleges like Harvard and Yale and Princeton, where I went to school, helped create the Boston Brahmin, those who sat on selective clubs on boards of banks and corporations. It helped create the wealth that some of us still enjoy. We know the drill. If we ever look more closely at the history of this church, I imagine we have some sense of what we will find. It's all connected, all interconnected. We are part of the original sin on which this country was founded, and we know it. So it's been a lot, hasn't it? It's been a lot to take in. to wrestle with, to be present to. It takes a tremendous amount of energy, and I confess that some days I'm better at it, the being present, than others. Maybe that's why sometimes I feel kind of flat or kind of numb, and other times a kind of bone deep weariness, as if my soul were tired, just tired from all the suffering. It's tempting to look away, but I know that's not an option. I've done that too often in my life, my white privilege allowing that, allowing me to pick and choose, to look selectively. Martin Luther King's words come back to me. Every society, he writes, has its protectors of the status quo, its fraternities of the indifferent, who are notorious for sleeping through revolutions. I know I don't want to be one of them. Today, he writes, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. It's been an incredible, historic, difficult, challenging, energizing, hopeful, amazing time. And I want to say thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with me and our staff and each other during these long, difficult months. Some of you have probably seen that wonderful sign. The church has left the building. Yes, we have, and we're still being church. Thank you for buying groceries for your neighbor, for calling someone, for writing a note. Thank you for driving in a cheer parade, giving money for food for school kids this summer. Thank you for bringing food to the food pantry. Thank you for meeting in small groups and committees online to do the work that remains of Deacons and Youth Programs Committee and Outreach and Anti-Racism and Community Engagement and so much more. I started writing this looking at that little patch of something in my backyard, and I want to close this morning with another image of green earth. Back in the winter, before COVID-19 struck, I read an essay called Sacred Hospitality by Adam Horowitz. I commend it to you. I learned about something called fire refugia. It seems that when there is a forest fire, after a great fire sweeps through the forest, there are sometimes left behind little patches of green, tiny pockets of life that somehow the fire has passed over. Fire refugia, refugia from the word refuge. Scientists are still studying them, and they say there's a lot more to learn. But they say that they're like little islands of green where plants can still grow, and they shelter species that otherwise might have been completely wiped out. Apparently, fire refugia don't have to last forever to make a difference. Even short-lived ones can make a big impact. I read about them last winter, but that image has come back to me this spring as pandemic and protest and devastation has swept across our country and around the world like a great fire. I've thought about those little fire refugia and wondered if there might be some way that our own spiritual community could become one of them. A little pocket of nourishment, offering our own small and humble version of sacred hospitality, like food and water, hope and courage, companionship and comfort. Could we be, I wondered, our own handmade version of a fire refugia, offering succor in a world that's been ravaged by loss and grief and fear and rage? I remembered that in the difficult and violent time of the Middle Ages, that's what monastic communities did. They sheltered art and literacy and learning. Could we do that in our time? Could we nurture communities that are spiritual and cultural and civic refugia? I hope so. I hope our community can be, as Imani Perry put it, a little patch of something, growing hope, growing a new generation of children and teenagers, sheltering families and older folks, and any one of us who seek comfort, courage, truth-telling, change. This summer, like many of you, I won't be going too far from home. I'll be tending my little patch of green, watching those seedlings grow into tall sunflowers, I imagine. I'll be thinking of the psalmist's words, "Be still and know that I am God." I know I need some stillness now, some silence. I need to try to center down, as the Quakers say, to rest, to return to the one that we call by many different names, but that I name as God. I look forward to walking with you on this journey again in the fall. Blessings on you. Thank you. And let's sing together, or as best we can, together apart, the hymn that Ian chose for us, such a beautiful one for our final hymn, "Love Will Guide Us." The words will be on your screen.
Please join me in our call to ministry. We go forth from the worship of God to be faithful to the vision of Jesus, to affirm each person's dignity, and to cherish the living earth.
God of our pilgrim hearts, bless the path beneath our feet, the sky over our heads, and this green and growing world. As we leave the shelter of this community, help us remember that we are not alone. Help us find your presence in sky and field, wind and sea, and in the eyes and hearts of our pilgrim companions who walk with us on this road. Give us strength. We need it for the living of these days. Bless us with beauty, shelter us with compassion, and nurture us with love. God of our pilgrim hearts, until we meet again, hold each one of us in the palm of your hand. Amen.